get on that? I had one.
Welcome back to Strange True Stories, or if this is your first visit, welcome. I have an incredible, almost unbelievable story from 9/11 that I had never heard about until just recently. It is a story of a man trying to climb down the outside of the burning North Tower on 9/11. He's been called the climbing man. You guys, I can't even imagine this experience. So here it is. September 11th, 2001 began like any other day until a sudden boom shook lower Manhattan at 8:46 a.m. The North Tower of the World Trade Center was engulfed in flames. American Airlines Flight 11 had struck between the 93rd and 99th floor. High above ground, over 1,300 people were trapped in the North Tower above the impact zone with no escape possible. If you were above the 93rd floor, there was no path down to safety. All stairwells and elevators had been destroyed or blocked. Thick black smoke and searing heat began to consume the upper floors, turning offices into deadly ovens. Trapped workers crowded around broken windows, gasping for breathable air and peering down 1,300 feet to the streets below. In these upper floors of the burning towers, a harrowing choice emerged: remain and face the intense smoke and heat, or leap from the windows to a faster, certain death. Some, in their desperation, even tried inventive escape plans, tying tablecloths or curtains into makeshift parachutes or ropes, but these attempts failed almost immediately. One man fashioned a rope out of a knotted fabric and tried to lower himself, only to lose grip after a few floors. For most, the unbearable conditions gave them no choice. As one observer put it, "I've never believed that they actually decided to jump. The heat was just so ferocious it drove them out." Tragically, an estimated 200 people fell or jumped from the towers that morning. This is the story about one of those victims. Amid this devastation, witnesses saw something almost unbelievable in the North Tower. One man appeared at a high-floor window, but instead of jumping, he climbed out. Clinging to the exterior steel columns, he began shimmying his way downward. Eyewitnesses on the ground and in neighboring buildings watched in astonishment as this figure slowly descended the side of the skyscraper, attempting what seemed impossible. Eyewitness accounts say that this mystery climber started his descent around 9:35 a.m. from roughly the 94th floor of the North Tower. Unlike other victims who only managed to hang on to the facade for a few seconds, this individual was moving downward with determination. Using a rock climbing technique known as chimney climb, he wedged himself between the tower's vertical exterior columns, pressing his back and hands against one column and his feet against the opposite column, and carefully inched down. The Twin Towers design featured closely spaced perimeter steel columns with narrow window gaps, only 22 inches apart, forming vertical channels. This man ingeniously turned those slim gaps to his advantage. By bracing himself between the columns, he created opposing pressure, a technique rock climbers use to climb inside of chimneys or between close walls. A tiny metal ridge, barely an inch or two deep, ran along the bottom of each window pane. That was all the foothold he had. With his back against one column and his legs pushing in the other column, he had to support his entire body weight and move downward step by step. Any slip of grip would be fatal. Carefully, he wriggled his way down floor by floor, straddling the columns and using every bit of strength and skill to maintain his hold. As the climber made his way down, he would have confronted numerous challenges aside from sheer exhaustion. First was the extreme heat and exposure. At over 1,000 feet up in the air, winds can be strong, and one can only imagine the terror he felt looking down at tiny ant-like people on the ground. There was also intense heat emanating from the windows above and debris falling from the tower. But in that moment, his focus was survival. Witnesses later remarked on the courage and composure it must have taken, the absolute horror and desperation he must have felt. I can't even imagine. But he must have also had a ton of hope, locked in and focused. Had he somehow reached the 75th, 76th floor zone, he would have found no regular windows to climb into, only vent grates and sealed mechanical access doors. Perhaps in theory he might drop down into the louvered opening and find a service door, but those doors were likely locked and required special key cards. In other words, the mechanical floor was an imposing barrier on his path down. His best chance was an open window, If the climber hoped to re-enter the building at a lower level below the impact and fire, he would need an open or broken window to crawl back inside. And in that cruel twist of fate, there was indeed a broken window just a short distance from the path he was taking down. Photographic analysis later showed that just one column over from where he was climbing, a window around the 92nd floor had been blown out. That window might have been a portal to an interior stairwell or a room with breathable air, his best chance at saving himself. But at 9:59 a.m., as the climber clung to the North Tower, the unthinkable happened. The South Tower began to collapse. A monstrous rumble echoed across Manhattan as 110 stories of steel and concrete came crashing down in a massive cloud of dust. The shock waves rippled through the ground and air. In the North Tower, which was still standing, lights flickered and the building swayed violently from the impact of its twin's demise. A hurricane-force gust of wind and debris blasted upwards. For the man on the side of the North Tower, this was a catastrophic turn. Eyewitnesses lost sight of him around the moment the South Tower fell. It's believed that the tremendous vibration and air pressure from the collapse may have thrown him off balance. The thick plume of dust and ash would have instantly enveloped him, making it impossible to see or breathe. No one witnessed the exact moment he fell. There was so much chaos as people ran from the collapsing South Tower that the climber's fate passed without any camera definitively recording it. He never made it to the ground alive. In the aftermath of this terroristic catastrophe, this man remained an enigma. His identity was a mystery. There were no obvious clues from the distance at which he was observed. But over the years, 9/11 researchers and online communities kept returning to the haunting tale of the man who tried to climb down the tower. For a long time, the climbing man remained unidentified, an anonymous figure symbolizing desperate hope. But recent deep dive research and crowdsourced sleuthing have led to a compelling theory about who he might have been. One name has emerged: Frank Reisman. Frank Reisman was a 41-year-old equities trader at Cantor Fitzgerald, working in the North Tower on the morning of 9/11. What makes Frank stand out is that he was known to be an avid mountain climber and outdoorsman, and perhaps the only person above the North Tower's impact zone with significant climbing experience. Frank Reisman's background reads almost like a resume for someone who might attempt such a daring escape. When Frank Reisman was single, mountain climbing was his passion, wrote the New York Times. In his youth, he had hiked the Appalachian Trail solo from Maine down to Pennsylvania. He loved backcountry hiking and rock climbing. Friends described him as adventurous and fit. It was as well known among his colleagues and family that he could scale rock faces and wasn't afraid of heights. Frank's family has never publicly indicated knowledge of his final actions, and tragically his body was never recovered. The identification remains unconfirmed, but in the collective 9/11 community, the climbing man and Frank Reisman have been linked as likely one and the same. On September 11th, cornered by unimaginable disaster, that same devoted dad drew on his youthful passion for climbing and one last extraordinary effort to get home to his family. It's heartbreaking to think how close he came, only to be cut off by the collapsing tower. In those 15 or 20 minutes on the side of the building, one man, likely Frank Reisman, achieved something truly extraordinary. 2,997 people lost their lives due to the hands of evil terrorists on 9/11. But out of the smoke and sorrow we found our strength, not in buildings, but in each other. Our nation and our ability to bond with each other has made America stronger than ever before. God, those stories wreck me. Wow. All right, so that's it for today's story. Thanks for listening. Please comment, like, and subscribe. I have more stories coming.